Good morning, everybody. I trust you're all well. If we could please just allow another minute or two for delegates to join. We've had quite a large number, and I see that many of them have not yet joined. So we'll just give them probably 2 or 3 minutes, and then we will kick off at 3 minutes past 10. Thank you. Okay, so good morning, everybody, again. Trust you're all well. I think we can make a start now. Firstly, welcome. Thanks for taking the time out. Good to see so many familiar faces. If I look at the names on the chat today, we were looking forward to, I think, discussing and exploring ISO 13485 certification, and then also hearing your comments, any questions you might have. The idea for today is really to help provide insight on the standard, but also equally important, colleagues, to understand your context, understand the challenges you face, and together try and deal with it and resolve it so we can collectively move the industry forward. So I'm going to quickly share my window and we get stuck in. Okay, I'm assuming you can see my screen. If not, please shout, but not too loud. You can, great. Okay, so my name is Oliver Naidoo, and I manage a few teams within JCA Auditors. And of course, today is what I believe our best team, the medical device colleagues that I am privileged to work with. That's just what you can expect for today's session. And you'll see Shiroma, who's actually the head of our division, will coordinate the discussions, and she'll be joined by Freddy. Ryan will talk through infrastructure, storage, contamination control, ID and traceability. And Simone, who's down in the Western Cape, will just give us some insight in terms of CAPAs, management review, internal audits, etc. And Scelo, who's up in the capital of the country, will talk us through just what are the aspects that we look at each of the audit stages. Shiroma will round up, and then we'll have a Q&A session. And I believe, Ryan, you've got a surprise for us. There's some breakout rooms just to for the different sectors that might have an interest in distributions or distributors rather, or manufacturing, etc. So we are looking forward to that. So for my slot, I want to quickly start off from a personal experience. We've got a wide cross-section of colleagues in the room. And many years ago, I used to be a QC technician. So this humorous slide takes me back to when I was a QC tech and something my boss said to me. So for those of you who are not familiar with certification and may have a creative idea of how to deal with audits, that slide tells you what not to do in an audit, okay? So don't chuck all your non-conforming products in your car and don't burn it. So that's just my weak attempt at some humor. I'm a former auditor, and auditors, we're not known for our humor. So if you didn't laugh at that, I'll totally understand. Okay, so my quick introduction is just to give you an idea of JC auditors and talk through just some of the approach we have in terms of our very unique client-focused approach. So as many of you know, I think there's many experts in the room, ISO is all about risk-based contextual audits, and we are very strong on that. We want to understand your business, understand your model, and really get to grips with auditing in context of your operating environment. And it's really important I emphasize that because often there's a kind of a perception that audits are a one-size-fit-all approach. But our approach is different, and as Shiroma often reminds me, we are a conformity assessment body. So we are looking for conformance, not looking for non-conformance. And the real goal of any ISO standard, and specifically ISO 13485, is we want to, when we come to site, help you understand the risk, especially risks that may impact on the patient, health and well-being at the end of the cycle, or risks that might compromise your business brand or compromise your ability to service your markets. So risk is a key part of what the audit approach is. And of course, it should be aligned, the standard and how you implement it, to continual improvement and to incorporate SAHPRA requirements. So many of you would know that it is now becoming mandatory in terms of a phased approach, which SAHPRA has, which the team will talk us through as well. In terms of assurance, the JC auditors are SANAS accredited, we are SAHPRA recognized, and all certifications that we issue, including 13485, are registered on the IAF global database. So if you are part of a global supply chain and you're supplying to the European, North American, or even South American markets, anybody can look up your certification on the IAF and validate that our certificate issued is in fact credible and accepted all around the world. As I've mentioned, the letter on the right hand of the slide confirms that we are SAHPRA approved. We also committed to the industry. Many years ago, we realized that our role as a certification body is not purely to come in once a year, audit, give you a report and done. We see ourselves as partners with the industry. We're members of SAMED and SALDA. We have really great relationships with MDMSA, for example, and we're committed to collaborating and advocating within the industry on how to embrace certification and what the roadmap is. And in fact, today's webinar is a key indicator of our commitment to the industry. So In terms of our certifications issued, the vast majority, as can be expected, are distribution companies, or how SAHPRA classifies them as distributors, and 28% are in the manufacturing space. And the little chart on the right indicates the different technical areas that our team has audited against within the manufacturing companies. And just a bit of further breakdown, I think we have, of all the certification bodies, we're very, I think, fortunate and blessed to have the most number of certifications, and Gauteng is still very much the hub. Western Cape, KZN are, of course, growing in that regard in terms of the number of certifications, and Eastern Cape has a few as well. I think there are a few that are missed out, because I think there was one in Mpumalanga, but maybe my stats didn't pull through. So we're very, I think, fortunate again to have issued certification to many of the leading corporates. But having said that, we probably are more we're more fortunate in that we deal with a wide cross section of medical device companies, ranging from the likes of the big global corporates, but we also do work for the little small distributor who works from a home office, the one-man band kind of operation. So we quite understand the nuances around the different sizes of businesses, complexities, processes, etc. You must forgive me if you're a client of ours and your name or your logo is not on this slide. I have to blame Ryan. He put me under pressure. He said, listen, keep it short, one slide only. So that's the reason. If your name is not on there, please don't shoot me. Somebody threatened to shoot me after the last one. Okay, that's just a little intro. And again, thank you for joining us. I think you're going to be very impacted from what's to come from the experts in the field. So on that note, I'm going to hand you over to Shiroma. We're going to start with the real sort of heavy lifting. Thanks, Shiroma.
Thank you, Oliver. Thank you, and welcome again to everyone. We're always pleased to see such a good turnout and the commitment to quality in the medical device industry as a whole. My session today is going to focus a bit on the JCA approach to assessments. We're going to be discussing a bit on quality objectives, and we're going to be looking at the different approaches to non-conformities. So let me just get started off right off the bat. And there have been many questions that we've been receiving about how we conduct our assessments. And when we assess during any audit, we follow 3 levels of hierarchy. And it's important for us to highlight this because the first level is obviously conformance. And this means that we're looking to assess that your processes and activities conform to the requirements of the standard ISO 13485. But that's just the first step. And conforming to requirements doesn't necessarily mean that the process is effective. So once we assess for conformance, we then begin to assess for effectiveness. And as you know, the standard asks that your quality management system is suitable, it's adequate, and it's effective. And yes, there are instances where your processes can conform, but not be effective. And I'll use a very simple example. So you may have a record for a process, but you may have established 2 different records for the same process, which contradict each other or have conflicting information. In which case you've met what the standard is asking for. You've conformed in that you have a record available, but it's not completely effective in the information that it's passing. As another example, you may have established the controls or processes for obsolete documents, which is what the standard requires, but you may still have obsolete documents floating around or being distributed, which means that the conforming process is not completely effective or hasn't been implemented effectively. And of course, the last layer to our assessments is efficiency. So while a process may conform and might be effective, it may not be the most efficient way to carry out an activity. Now, this layer of the assessment process is what we call the adding value to your organization. And it's within the scope of your activities. And this is where we bring forward any opportunities for improvement, any recommendations, suggestions, which are based on our experience and what we've seen as the industry best practices. Let's consider a very rudimentary example. You may have a record for a process which covers what ISO 13485 requires, and that means you conform. And the record is effective in that it captures all of the necessary information. But you may have multiple records capturing the same information, in which case it may be more efficient to consolidate those records and reduce the paperwork, okay? And that's what we highlight to you. Now, I felt it was important to bring this to the forefront and highlight this to everyone because as I know, as everyone knows, that previously the approach to audits was simply to look for conformance, but that does not add any value to your organization. And there's nothing more meaningful to us than when we sit in a closing meeting and management is grateful that we've pointed out something that could improve the way business is conducted, or more importantly, that we highlighted a potential risk to them. And as I always say to all our clients, yes, quality may not be the income generating department. It's certainly not the most liked department with the most liked employees. We know that, we've accepted that, but we need to change the way we see quality, because it is loss control, and it's your loss control initiative. So if any organization sees it as important to cover and pay for business insurance, then you have to see the value and the importance of your quality management system and what quality is doing on a daily. So that's just a bit about how we conduct our assessments, and it's important to highlight those aspects. So next I want to touch on objectives. And I know these objectives seem like such a small, insignificant portion of the entire quality management system. And I know we all feel that way. But we're starting to see an increased number of findings or non-conformities around objectives. And we're often getting asked the question, why are these objectives important? Why are we focusing on them as auditors if it seems so insignificant to an organization? Now, the reason why they're important is because these objectives are setting the goals, they are setting the targets to conduct your activities in line with the strategic direction of an organization. So when we come in, we're looking at the overarching direction and activities of your company. These objectives are monitoring if we're on track with meeting those targets and whatever we've set out for the organization. And that's why we look at how are you monitoring your objectives to ensure that you're on track. Objectives are also very important in highlighting any risks within the organization. And we'll get to that in a minute. But we're also looking to see that these objectives are being measured, they're being analyzed to encourage or enforce continual improvement, okay? Now, there's a very popular case in the industry, and I'm sure a lot of you on the call might be aware of this, but I think it highlights very nicely the importance of objectives. So some time ago, a lawsuit was filed against a medical device company, and that was because a patient had unfortunately passed away. And when the root cause analysis was conducted for why that had led to a patient demise, it was discovered that the root cause of that particular incident was in fact the company quality objectives. Now, I know it seems very far-stretched, but let me explain it while we run through this. The organization had set an objective to receive less than 5 complaints per year. And their objectives were linked to individual personnel KPIs. And therefore, it had a knock-on effect on personal remuneration or employee remuneration. So when that 6th complaint came in to the organization, it got swept under the carpet because it meant, firstly, the company was not going to meet its objectives, and secondly, someone's annual bonus was going to be affected. So when we assess quality objectives, we're not just looking at whether they have been established and whether they have measures to them. We need to ensure that they are effective in the way that they've been established. Okay, so these objectives must not work against your organization. They must be measurable aspects which your company has control over. Now, I know everyone is familiar with objectives by now, and everyone who's had anything to do with quality objectives will by now be reciting the acronym SMART in their sleep, I'm sure. But let's take a look at a very simple example. This is an extract of ABC trading objectives, hypothetically, and we can see that we are looking just at some warehouse and sales objectives. And yes, indeed, these are part of your quality objectives, and we'll discuss that in a moment. So our warehouse objectives look fine. We're monitoring the objective. We're achieving our target that's set at 98% on or higher for on-time deliveries, okay? Now let's look closely at the second line where we have a sales objective for timeliest response to customer inquiries. Now, as you can see, the objective has been set for a response to 100% of customer inquiries within 2 days. Now, as you can see from the monitoring on the table on the right, this objective has not been met in line with the target. You can see it's always below 100%. Now, firstly, we cannot wait until the end of the year in December to realize that a target is not being met. We can see after the very first 3 months that this target is at risk. At that point, this objective needed review. And during that review, 2 things should have been identified. Firstly, is 2 days attainable? All right? Because questions should have arisen, what happens on weekends? What happens on public holidays? And is 2 days as the method really attainable? Secondly, the next question that should have been asked is 100% as a measure realistic? Because we are human and we rely on technologies which sometimes fail us. Okay, so after this review, the objective should have been updated in line with the outcome of that review. Perhaps we say we change the method to 2 working days. Right? Or we say a 98% on-time response. All right, and it's important that we do that so that we're able to meet these objectives and the targets that we set for ourselves. Now, after we've reviewed the objectives, it's important to remember that these objectives are not written in stone. They are meant to be updated in line with the reviews that you conduct on these objectives. And that is what we are looking to assess when we review quality objectives within an organization. We're looking for what actions have been taken when an objective hasn't been met. All right, and that's very important. Now, there's very little chance that we will tell you in an organization that your objective is wrong or it's incorrect, because there's no way we can set out what your company objectives are. We may point out when something is not within your control, but if you've set an objective for your organization, then so be it. But you need to demonstrate how you measure it, what the target is, and how you monitor those objectives to let us know, has that objective been achieved or not? So spend some time with your objective. It's not meant to be one person's responsibility, and rest assured, it is something that is reviewed during every assessment because it forms part of your quality management system elements. And you can see on the slide, we've highlighted some of the common assessment findings or audit findings, non-conformities around objectives. where they are not measurable, where they're not being monitored for their progress or being monitored to determine whether they've been achieved, where they're not being reviewed and updated if they are at risk. Often we find that objectives are not established at different levels or functions within the organization. And something that we do find quite often is that we don't actually consider quality and regulatory objectives, which are just as important when it comes to setting these. So I hope that gave you some insight into quality objectives, why we spend so much of time on objectives and reviewing it, and something you will notice when you get to surveillance assessments, for instance, is that we will no longer just be looking at the objectives set for that year. So for the 2026 surveillance assessment, we will look at objectives from 2025 as well, because we want to see what has changed in your objectives, what have we met, and what have we updated. Okay, so just to wrap up, I just want to test the waters with a fairly new introductory concept. So some might have heard of a place called Silicon Valley, and as we all know, it's the epicenter for high technology, software, and innovation that's based in California. But I recently learned something about the organizations in Silicon Valley, and they have a concept that's called failing fast. And what this concept means is that the developers want to find as many issues, as many bugs, as many faults as quickly as possible so that they get to a perfect product as fast as they can. So they want to know what's going wrong so they can fail the product and fix it quickly. They fail the product so that they can get to the right product faster. Now, this got me thinking on the way we handle non-conformities in a quality management system. Because of late, we've been seeing an increasing trend across the industries where non-conformities have become the basis for disciplinary action, warning letters being issued, personnel being reprimanded. And all that is done without first looking at how do I fix the system. I've even seen instances where employees raise non-conformities against each other, so it becomes personal rather than looking at the system. Now, this failing fast concept is replicated in our corrective action process. We look for issues and we should be encouraging people to report those issues so that we can fix it, to get to a near perfect QMS as quickly as possible. So we need to change our mindset around these non-conformities. It is not a negative occurrence. It's a learning opportunity and an opportunity to improve. So within our organizations, we need to think of ways to change the culture around non-conformities so that they start to add value within a company. And remember, with this concept of failing fast in Silicon Valley, it's incremental steps which led to the success of a final output. It's not an overnight miracle. So let us try to embrace the non-conformities, see them as opportunities when they present themselves and when we find them. All right, I hope that gave you some insight or some valuable information. I want to hand you over now to Ryan, who's going to take you through some more topics that hopefully will add some insight to ISO 13485. Thank you so much. Over to Ryan.
Thank you for that, Shiroma. Very, very well done. Please, I just want to confirm if you can see my screen.
We can, Ryan, but I'm going to raise the non-conformance against you for not using the company background, but it's fine, we'll do it later.
Thanks, Oliver. Thank you for that. Okay, so thank you so much for attending. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day, especially on a Friday, to join us for our ISO 13485 Unpacked session. So my name is Ryan Freddy, and I'll be focusing on the forward focus of ISO 13485. During my presentation, I'm just going to ask you to keep your phones at the ready. because we are going to have some interactive slides just to have a quick quiz or knowledge base. You're going to scan the QR code on the slide and then submit a response. Okay, so let's start off very quickly with a confidence check before we get into some of our topics. As I've explained, scan the QR code and submit your response. So the question for our confidence check is, if an organization conducts activities from 2 sites, how many SAHPRA licenses are required? So we'll just allow a few moments just to get some responses in to see. Okay, so you can scan the QR code, log in as a guest, and choose the correct option. Okay, so I see responses are coming in. Okay, good. It looks like it was 50-50, and then
Ron, just to confirm, the colleague should log in as guest.
as
I was
guest.
silly enough to go into my Google account and it's asking me for a password. So yeah, log in as guest.
As guest, 100%. Thank you, Oliver. Okay, so I see we're getting responses. To those of you who've selected 2, you are correct. If an organization conducts activities from 2 sites, 2 SAHPRA licenses are required. And in my next slide, I'll just explain. When we are submitting an application to SAHPRA, we see that a separate application must be submitted for each site for distributors, manufacturers, and wholesalers. So one of the common aspects that we tend to see during the audit process is that an organization may have 2 or more sites, but only hold 1 license. So just remember that the license is issued per site, but also may differ depending on the activities conducted on that site. I know this can sometimes be a bit controversial and might not often be well received, but it's always best to create awareness around these aspects, and especially regulatory requirements, which safeguards the organization from that regulatory impact. So this is essentially on the information tab on the SAHPRA license application when submitting notes for each site. Okay, so before we delve into the topics of identification, traceability, infrastructure, I thought it would be a great start
Ryan,
to start.
sorry to interrupt you, but Ria has her hand up. So Ria, I'm not sure if you have a burning question.
Yes, hi, good morning, JC auditors and the team. I just wanted to clarify, are our questions only at the end of the session as per your
Yes.
stipulated agenda? So we just need to write them down and then post them at the end of the presentation, not
Yes.
during your presentations.
100%.
Excellent.
Thanks,
Thank you
Ria.
for that clarity.
No problem at all. Okay, so I thought it'd be great to start to define what a site is. So we see, according to IAF MD1, we see that a site is highlighted as processes or activities under the control of an organization at a given location that are carried out. And then from the ISO 13485-2016 standard, some of the clauses that I will be focusing on are clause 6.3, 6.4, 7.1, 7.5.8 for identification, 7.5.9 for traceability, 7.5.10 for customer property, 7.5.11 for preservation of product, and 7.6 in terms of control of monitoring and measuring equipment from a practical application perspective, and what we tend to zone in on during the audit process. Okay, so let's do a quick confidence check once again. I'm going to ask you to pull out your phones and scan the QR code, log in as a guest, and let's see how confident we are with traceability. If you're unable to log into the app and scan the QR code, you're more than welcome to pop a response into the chat. Okay, I see one response in that needs improving. Excellent, good. Okay, perfect. So I see that the responses are coming in, and now we know what to focus on as we go through the process. Okay, so firstly, I'm going to use this distribution process flow as my example throughout my slides. We will be delving into each part of the process and exploring how various clauses or requirements interact with each other rather than in silos. So we can see we have a basic receiving process where products and materials are received here in a separate area with quality inspections being performed. Then we move over to the storage aspect where products and materials are stored according to the specific storage conditions required to maintain product conformance. And then we go to the distribution process, and this is the fulfillment of the customer order with the final checks being performed before distribution. Okay, so in our distribution process flow, we'll kick off with identification and traceability, which is often seen as a simple concept, but is generally the invisible thread throughout present throughout the processes. Often in audits, we hear something along the lines of, but we're not manufacturers, so traceability is out of our scope, or that we do not assign the lot numbers. Exploring clause 7.5.9.1, we see that organizations should define the extent of traceability for their operations. Traceability simply assists us in determining where did the product come from and where did it go or where is it going. And we can see from our process flow the extent of our traceability in the next slide. So for a distributor, we can see that the extent of traceability is from receipt to dispatch. When we look at the extent of traceability for a distributor, it is correct that you do not assign the lot number as it is assigned by the manufacturer. That makes it slightly easier as the lot, serial, or batch number will assist in effective tracking of the device. The extent of traceability for the distributor is what is in your control. And from our simple example, we can see that from receipt to dispatch is our extent. Clauses 7.2, customer-related processes, and clause 7.4, purchasing, greatly impact this process because we determine from 7.2 what does the customer require, and from 7.4, who supplies what the customer needs. Looking at the extent of traceability for manufacturer is firstly assigning the unique identifier. This is presented to us as the lot, serial, or batch numbers. The second part is to whom did we supply the product. In the case of distributors, it is supplied to the end users, wholesalers, or another distributor, while manufacturers would often supply further up the supply chain, such as to the distributors. There are cases, of course, where manufacturers would supply to hospital groups or retailers directly, and this would fall under your extent of traceability. Okay, so it's that time again, just to pop out our phones and scan the QR code, and let's just see our confidence on how long should records for Class D and custom-made implants be retained. This is one of the aspects of traceability as well, and this is from a Class D or custom-made implant. Okay, so we have 5 years from point of sale, 10 years from point of sale, 50 years from point of sale, and I see that the responses are coming in slowly. Okay, so from the responses, I see that one person has selected 50 years from point of sale. To the one person, you are absolutely correct. Because when we refer to Government Gazette 40480, which can be found on the SAHPRA website, we reference specifically clause 26. We see The manufacturer, distributor, or wholesaler of a Class D or implantable custom-made medical device must keep a record of a Class D or implantable custom-made medical device in the form of invoices that must reflect the date of transaction of every sale, proprietary name of the medical device, the name and address of every purchaser, quantity sold, and batch or serial number. A record referred to in Sub-Regulation 3 must be kept for a period of 50 years from the point of sale. Okay, so I hope that answers your question. Okay, so now we'll be exploring on how does labeling input into our processes. Exploring how simple label can input into our process, we need to explore some of the symbols depicted. And from my previous slide, you'll see that I've referenced ISO 15223-1, 2021. Firstly, we see the reference number, and the reference number essentially tells us what that product is, which is different from the lot number. The lot number is the unique identifier assigned to a specific group of products manufactured or processed together under identical conditions. The reference number for a specific product is generally always the same, whilst the lot number differs. Often what comes up in audits is that some organizations do not track the lot number and only the reference number, which leads to ineffective inventory management. Since different lots have different expiry dates, FIFO principles become slightly more difficult to implement. In the event of a recall of a specific lot, it definitely becomes an administrative nightmare to determine which lot went where. And rather than recalling the one specific batch that's affected, a notice is generally sent out to all products with that same reference number, which includes unaffected batches or lots. Then when we look at the symbols on the right-hand side in the second row, they outline the storage conditions and the nature of the device. We see that 2 with the strike through is a single-use device. And another aspect that we've noted during the audit process is that sometimes control of monitoring and measuring equipment, which is clause 7.6, specifically for temperature sensors, are marked not applicable when we assess the quality manual. However, during the facility tour, when we notice product labels, they tend to have specific temperature requirements. So this label here, which looks a bit like a thermometer, has temperature ranges that we'll focus in on during the facility tour. Thus, we follow the audit trail to the quality manual to see the applicability of that clause, or the medical device file to see the storage and handling conditions. Okay, just another quick confidence check. What does the symbol represent? We've just covered it slightly in our previous slide. So it's the symbol with the circle and the 2 and the strike through it. Perfect. So it seems that everyone has it correct so far. It is a single-use device. Okay, just to touch in on the receiving process. Aspects covered in identification, traceability, preservation of product, customer property, infrastructure, work environment, and contamination control are all interlinked in these processes that we'll be zoning in on. So when we look at the quality control or receiving process, we look at, have we received the correct thing? Is the product damaged? If it is damaged, do we need to quarantine it or put it on hold or segregate? The period until expiry, because I know often when we distribute a product, it needs to have at least 6 months until expiry, sometimes 3 months, or the customer will not accept it. The lot number, and then the process of GRV or GRN. Did we receive the correct quantity? And who is the person receiving it, that is signing for those products received? And then the storage conditions. Are we required to store the product upright? Does it need to be stored in cold chain? Does it need to be stored in ambient conditions? Moving to the next part of the process is the storage or warehousing perspectives. And we look at if the storage conditions are adequate. Like I've mentioned, does it need to be stored in cold chain or ambient conditions? Do we need to have temperature monitoring or temperature control? Our inventory management, how many do we have of a specific lot or batch? Are they grouped together? And then FIFO and FIFO principles. So first in, first out principles, and then first expiry, first out. Contamination control, picking and packing, who's responsible for this? Have they been trained correctly? Do they pick the correct product? Are they familiar with the symbols of the product? Maintenance of the facility itself. There was one example of an audit process that we were going through, and it just so happened to be storming on that day. And, you know, when we audit, there is always an extra person in an audit, Murphy, because Murphy's law applies. So while we're assessing active devices, we see that the roof had a bit of a leak, which could compromise the integrity of the product. So maintenance, we must ensure that our infrastructure is correctly maintained. And then preservation of product, does our conditions of storage preserve the product requirements? This is just a bit of a process flow of the control of monitoring and measuring equipment. So when we receive products, if they need to be weighed, I know sometimes for sterilization, we record the weight of the product. So our scales is an example of something that would fall under control of monitoring and measuring equipment. And then the more common example are temperature sensors. Then when we look at the process for control of non-conforming product, we see that conforming product is stored under specific requirements. And then we look at the process of quarantining product that is non-conforming, whether it is before delivery or whether it comes back from delivery. I know if we do our stock takes or stock count and we notice that product is damaged or expired, sometimes we can put this on hold or move them into the quarantine area. In the event of a recall, if our products are causing an adverse event or reaction, then there might be a recall required to be conducted. And then zoning in on the distribution process. Have we distributed the correct thing? Is the product damaged? The period until expiry, once again, the lot number or the serial number or the batch number, the correct quantity, the person releasing the product, the storage conditions of the vehicle, and contamination control. There are cases sometimes we see where the same vehicles will be used to transport non-conforming product and conforming product. But what is our process for ensuring that our vehicles are cleaned, because this falls under our infrastructure requirements? So if we handle potentially contaminated product in the same vehicle, how are we ensuring that it does not contaminate our conforming product when out for delivery? Storage conditions for the vehicle, are they required to be transported in cold chain or normal ambient conditions? Do we need to protect them from sunlight, or do we have to store them upright? And just to start rounding up, we see the invisible thread of identification and traceability and how it connects with our infrastructure, work environment, and contamination control. Because we see that the common theme of these clauses is infrastructure needed to achieve conformity to product requirements, work environment needed to achieve conformity to product requirements, and for contamination control, to prevent contamination of the work environment, personnel, or product. We see that each of these aspects touch on product preservation and customer property. So customer property, if applicable, we need to ensure that customer property that is under our care is safeguarded. Are we preserving the product requirements as stipulated? So I think we should remember that the system should work for us and not us for the system. We often see that separate procedures are maintained for each of these clauses, which is correct. But remember, that procedures can also be combined when addressing a clause speaking about the same aspect. And I do believe my colleague Shiroma has touched on this in terms of efficiency, effectiveness, and conformance. This helps us move from a tick box exercise to a practical application. Remember that product preservation and customer property are, if applicable, are speaking about maintaining the integrity of the product whilst under our control. And when we look at clause 6.3, clause 6.4.1, and clause 6.4.2, we see that they also address conformity to product requirements. Okay, so thank you. That is all from my side. I hope you found that informative and insightful. I'm going to hand over to my colleague Simone Roberts, who's going to walk us through Auditor Insights.
Thank you, Ryan, for your informative presentation. Happy Friday, everyone. Can you all see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. So again, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. So imagine walking into a medical manufacturing facility where every process is clearly documented, every risk is anticipated, and every improvement is intentional. As an auditor, I can tell you this is not just an ideal scenario. It is the result of a disciplined and well-executed approach to management review, internal audit, and corrective and preventative action under ISO 13485. So these three pillars are not merely compliance requirements, they form the heartbeat of a robust quality management system that protects patients' safety, satisfies the regulators, and drives continuous improvement. So let's tackle them. So out of the auditor's lens, what do we really look for? So before diving into each topic, let me briefly explain how auditors typically approach these elements. So we are not simply checking if the procedure exists, we are evaluating. So interconnected quality system. So auditor view the management review, internal audits and CAPA as an integrated system to ensure that the QMS effectiveness and of course regarding patient safety. Risk-based thinking. So we as auditors expect identification, evaluation, and control of risk linked to patient safety during audits and of course the CAPA activities. Traceability and outcomes. Traceability from audit findings to CAPA and management decisions demonstrate that the QMS control and maturity. Lastly, your management commitment. Auditors look for leadership involvement, resource allocation, and accountability beyond the policies and slogans. So, first of all, the management review. So we can describe the management review as the control tower of the QMS. So what ISO 13485 expects is a structured evaluation carried out by top management to ensure alignment between the strategies and operations. So what is the typical inputs? Internal and external audit results, customer feedback and complaints, process performance and product conformity, your status of your CAPA, changes that affects the quality management system, and of course, regulatory updates, just to mention a few. Now, the required outputs, usually it's the QMS improvement decisions, resources needed, and product-related improvements. So out of our auditor's perspective, we typically observe two common issues. So first of all, highly formal meetings with little meaningful discussions or informal discussions with no documented evidence. So neither is really effective. So what do we look for instead? Are trends analyzed, not just presented? Are risks evaluated, especially patient and related risk? Are decisions data-driven? And are action items tracked and complete? So what does a really effective management review looks like? So it demonstrates leadership ownership of the quality. So it used your data to support the decisions, clearly prioritize the risk, and assigns accountability and timelines. So a strong review tells a clear story. Here is what we learned, what we decided, and what can be improved. Next of the 3 pillars is your internal audit. This is the diagnostic engine. So internal audits are often seen as a routine, but their true value lies in objectivity and insight. So ISO 13485 requires audits as planned intervals. Of course, all of you know that. But auditors assess how well they are done, not just did they occur. So key expectations include a risk-based audit program that focus on critical processes and past issues, auditor independence, because auditors should not audit their own work, clear documentation of findings. This includes your non-conformities and your opportunities for improvement, as well as reporting results to management. What is the common weaknesses that we observe? Checklist style audits with limited depth, weak or incomplete root cause analysis, and repeated issues across the audit cycle. So a mature audit system, it acts as an early warning system, identifying issues before they escalate. So what auditors value is that auditors who understand the process, both from the process and the standard, findings that clearly show what happened, which requirements was not met, and your objective evidence. Identification of your systematic issues, that is not isolated ones. And most importantly, internal audit results must feed directly into your corrective and preventative action, as well as your management review. So what is the value of an internal audit then? It strengthens compliance, it identifies risk early, it improves efficiency, it prepares for external audits, and it enhances product safety. So internal audits are not just a tick box, they are a strategic improvement tool. The third pillar of the 3 is the corrective and preventative action. So I would say this is the heart of the continuous improvement. So, and Shiroma also touched on this, but the CAPA is one of the most scrutinized areas because it reflects how an organization responds to problems. So what is an effective CAPA? What does it include? So through root cause analysis, use a structural tool, for example, the 5 whys, a fishbone diagram, or data analysis, and clear distinguishing between the corrective action, preventative action, and timely implementation and effective verification. So let's see what effectiveness really means. So for us, from our perspective, the key question is, has the root cause been eliminated and is reoccurrence prevented? So effectiveness is not closing the CAPA after completing actions, providing training records alone, or fixing only one occurrence. Effectiveness is addressing the true root cause, demonstrating the non-recurrence over time, and ensuring no new risks are introduced. So Shiroma also touched on this. So the key as well is building a strong root cause analysis culture. So a strong root cause analysis culture requires more than tools. It requires a culture. So organizations should, or we encourage organizations to train employees in the root cause analysis method, encourage open issue reporting, promote cross-functional collaboration, avoid blame, focus on the learning, and integrate your root cause analysis into your daily work. And leadership must also prioritize, because prevention over correction and quality over speed. Let's quickly look at one example of a 5 why analysis. So say, for instance, there's an increase in the customer complaints due to a device that leaks. So start beginning, why the leakage? There was a seal failure. Next, why? Why was there a seal failure? Maybe inconsistent sealing pressure. Why pressure was inconsistent? Equipment calibration drift. Why the drift? Missed preventative maintenance. Why missed preventative maintenance? There was no automated reminder system. So what is the root cause? Inadequate preventive maintenance system leading to a missed calibration interval. In conclusion, some practical advice. So for an effective management review, focus on decision-making supported by visual data, trend analysis, and clear issue action linkage to show leadership control. Secondly, competent internal audits. Train auditors to assess real process performances, tracking input to output to identify the weaknesses and improvement areas. A robust CAPA implementation. Allocate resources for root cause analysis and define the effectiveness criteria to prevent premature CAPA closure and reoccurrence. And then QMS continuous improvement, management review, internal audits, and CAPA drive compliance, product quality, patient safety, and stakeholders' trust. If it's not written but not followed, it's a non-conformity. If it's followed but not written, it is still a non-conformity. So in conclusion, management review, internal audit, and CAPA are not administrative tasks. They are the foundation of a strong, effective QMS under ISO 13485. When implemented properly, they strengthen compliance, drive continuous improvement, enhance product quality, and most importantly, protect patient safety. By embracing these principles, your organization built not just a compliance, but trust, reliability, and excellence in medical device manufacturing. Thank you so much.
Okay, I think we can hand over to Scelo. Scelo Mguni will be presenting some guiding insights into what to expect during stage 1 and stage 2 audits. So over to you, Scelo.
Thank you, Shiroma. Thank you very much. I just want to confirm if you guys, if you can see my slide, the slide that I'm sharing.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. So my name is Scelo. I'm Scelo Mguni, and I am going to be focusing on what basically to expect during a stage 1 and stage 2 audits, right? So I'm going to be looking at the purpose and objectives of these 2 assessments. I'm also going to be touching a little bit on the common gaps that we come across when we conduct these assessments, as well as how one can prepare for a stage 1 and a stage 2 audit. Okay. All right. So the first thing that that an organization just needs to do before moving on to the stage 1 is basically document the system. Have that documentation, the procedures and the policies that are required. But in most cases, you find that there is some level of documentation that is there. Okay, so and you want to identify what is required by the regulator as well as the ISO standard. Okay, so we conduct what we call a gap analysis. This is just identifying the documentation that is required by the criteria and comparing it with what you have, and then you close that gap. So that gap analysis will help you identify the type of the procedures that are required. Remember, ISO 13485, it is a very prescriptive standard. It requires quite a number of procedures. It's different from ISO 9001, which is a bit flexible. So you just need to go through the requirements of SAHPRA as well as the requirements of the standard. And of course, you will have to identify the applicable clauses that align with the activities that you are conducted. And then you document those requirements, and you'll be able to close that gap. So after you have documented, you begin to make use of the procedures, and also the policies. And then you get into contact with a certification body, which is basically JC auditors. So they will send through an application form, which you will then complete. And when you have completed it, we then agree on a particular date to conduct the stage 1 audit. So it's stage 1 that starts, and then stage 2. So basically, stage 1 audit is basically focuses on the documentation. We just want to determine the readiness. Is your organization ready for a stage 2 audit, as well as the documentation? Is it there? Has it been established? Have the regulatory requirements been addressed? Okay. Okay. So I'm going to move on to the objectives of stage 1. So for stage 1, mainly the main objective is to review the quality management system, which is the quality manuals, the procedures. Okay, mainly the quality manuals and the procedures. The only records that are required during stage 1 are the management review records, as well as the internal audit records, because we need to confirm that these 2 activities are taking place. Otherwise, it's mainly the procedures, as well as the quality manual, as well as the quality manual. Okay, so when we review these documents, we are looking at what the standard requires, particularly if there are certain procedures where certain controls need to be defined. We go through those procedures, and we just want to ensure that those controls have been defined within the procedure. Okay. Then we also want to understand the organization's activities. What type of products are being handled by this organization? How risky are they? The risk classifications. Is this class A, or they are just or they are class D? Medical devices. We also want to have an understanding of the activities that are taking place. Are they installation activities? Are they servicing activities? Are they packaging or repackaging? We just want to have an understanding of the activities that are taking place, as well as the scope of the organizations. How many sites are we talking about here? Okay. Are they a manufacturer? Sometimes the organizations may not understand if there are distributors who are installing, and we find that in most cases they may have the wrong SAHPRA license. So those are some of the things that we look for. Okay, we also want to determine the organizational structure. How complex is this organization? And it will assist us in determining the time that is required to conduct stage 2, the stage 2 audit. Okay, then we also want to assess if the regulatory requirements have been documented. You find that SAHPRA has guidelines, right? Like the guidelines for the quality manual. So when we document that the quality manual, in most cases, we find that organizations are addressing the requirements in the ISO 13485 standard. But those that are indicated in the SAHPRA guideline for the quality manual, sometimes they will not be addressed. So those are some of the things that we'll be looking at. We also look at the SAHPRA license, whether the organization has the correct type of the license, particularly when it comes to those distributors who are installing, the distributors who are conducting servicing activities. You find that in most cases, they'll be having a distributor license. So we look at that also. We review that license. Sometimes you find that there are certain procedures that are missed, like the change control is one common procedure that is missed, but it's a requirement by SAHPRA. Okay, and then we also want to evaluate the preparedness for stage 2. We want to evaluate to assess if the organization is prepared for stage 2. Have they conducted a management review? Have they conducted also an internal audit? Okay, and then of course we want to review the scope and audit planning, right? Basically, it assists us in identifying the competencies of the auditors that will come to the organization and conduct the audit. It also assists us in identifying the number of days, like the duration. Are we going to come for 2 days? Are we going to come for 3 days? Depending on quite a few factors, like the number of employees in an organization, the risk classification, and there are quite a number of items that we look at, of course, being guided by certain IAF documents. So stage 1 really it assists us even on us as a certification body. So when we have conducted that stage 1, of course, we are going to identify gaps, which we will call the areas of concern. These are basically areas where we are saying this is a gap, and when we come for stage 2, if this is not addressed, it is a potential non-conformance. So you may need to address this aspect. Okay. So the common gaps that we identify during stage 1, we have incomplete procedures, where you can have a procedure is documented, but it does not address certain controls. Okay. For example, a procedure, if you have procedures that no procedure is identifying controls like confidential information. Okay, so you find that we have the adverse events. There is a form when the SAHPRA adverse events form, it requires that certain information about the patient who has encountered that adverse event be documented. So you find that if that form requires that kind of information, which is confidential, then an organization needs to implement controls or to document how such confidential information can be controlled, okay? And then there is also inadequate regulatory requirements. I have indicated that the requirements are indicated in the SAHPRA guidelines. Sometimes we overlook that, and also certain procedures that are required, we may also they may not be documented. And then there's also another aspect for quality objectives, which may be documented, but they are not measurable, difficult to monitor them. I think Shiroma has looked at that aspect. Okay, so that is that on stage 1. Now moving on to stage 2, the purpose really for stage 2 is to verify that what has been documented is what is actually happening, what is actually taking place. And at the end of stage 1, we want to recommend, at the end of stage 2, we want to recommend certification. Okay, so stage 2 is usually on site. Of course, we can have some remote, but most of the cases it is on site, because we want to conduct interviews, we want to review the records, and we want to make some observations of the processes actually taking place. Okay. So for stage 2, the objectives are mainly to verify implementation of the QMS and also assess the effectiveness of that QMS. So it's okay. So we are basically reviewing, particularly those records that demonstrate that, remember, records demonstrate that an activity has happened. If it's purchasing, we want the purchasing records that indicate that a product has been purchased, it was verified, it has been stored in this particular place, if it has been dispatched. So it's mainly looking at those records, okay? And also to assess the effectiveness of the QMS. We are mainly looking at the objectives, if those objectives have been met. And also we go further, like what Shiroma had indicated, that even if effectiveness even if a process is effective, we also want to look at the efficiency of that process. Okay. And then, of course, we want to confirm compliance with the ISO 13485 requirements. If it's a complaint, for example, if there is a complaint that came through, has it been investigated? And has there been any form of communication with the complainant? Is there any CAPA that was done? Effectiveness, has it been done? Effectiveness checks, have they been done? And how was it closed? Okay. Then we also want to evaluate regulatory compliance. In this case, we want to see if there has been, for example, if there has been an adverse event, has SAHPRA been informed? Okay, has there been any communication with SAHPRA regarding that kind of an event? So we are mainly looking at those records that indicate that there has been some communication, the forms, if it's the proper forms that have been completed, and so on. Okay. And then we want to evaluate the operational controls, right? Are there any controls in the storage area? Okay, environmental controls, are there any cleaning? Is there any cleaning, pest control that is taking place? During picking and packing, are there any verifications that are done? When we receive our products from the supplier, are there any verifications? Control of dispatch, is it taking place? And the suppliers themselves, are they being monitored? Are they being evaluated? So when we conduct this stage 2, we are mainly we're also looking at those controls, as well as the procedures for those operational processes. You find that sometimes when we come for stage 2, there is a process that is taking place, but it was not indicated during stage 1. Okay, we have come across such instances quite a number of times. So it's those kind of situations. That kind of information that we want to assess. Okay, there is also an aspect of risk assessment of risk management and CAPA effectiveness. So you find that risk is mainly identifying the potential non-conformances. So in most cases, we find that risks have been identified, but they are not being monitored. They are not being reviewed. The mitigations may be there, but there is no further rating or assess or basically rating of the risk that remains after implementation of the mitigation of the mitigation. So it becomes difficult now to be able to evaluate, to say, okay, the risk that is left after implementing the mitigation, is it acceptable? Or if it's not acceptable, what has been done? Okay. And then we also want to evaluate CAPA effectiveness. Simone has explained into detail on how we can go about that. Okay. Then we have verification of competence. Okay, so human resources, in this case, we want to determine whether they have the required competencies for the activities that they are conducting. That's when we look at their training activity, their certificates. Okay, so that is basically verification of the competence. And are there any awareness activities? Are there any trainings that have been that are put in place for that particular year? Are there any planned training activities regarding the quality policy, the objectives, and the operational activities? Okay, so the common gaps that we come across during stage 2, some of them have been discussed in detail by the previous presenters, but the CAPA effectiveness checks, this one is a very common one. The non-conformances are identified, root cause investigation is done, and they are closed. But you find that there is no effectiveness checks that is done So you find that effectiveness checks here, you need to implement, if it's a procedure that has been updated, you need to make use of that procedure for a certain period of time. And if that non-conformance does not recur, then it means it is effective. Then you can close the non-conformance. Then sometimes we can have delays. Sometimes the time that is set for closure of these CAPAs or the non-conformances, sometimes it would be too long. Okay, because when we identify a non-conformance, we implement a CAPA, we don't want to take too long to determine whether it's effective, because the processes will be going on, activities will be taking place. So we don't want to have a situation where the time that it takes to address these non-conformances is too long. Sometimes we also identify no mock recalls are conducted, particularly when we have organizations that handle both medicines and medical devices. They conduct mock recalls for medicines, but medical devices, sometimes they are not, for medical devices, they are not conducted. Okay, so in this case, we just need to indicate in the procedure how often you conduct mock recalls for medical devices, okay? And also incomplete risk assessment, I think I've explained on that, where you find that there are no further ratings to determine the risk that remains after implementing a mitigation. And we can also have ineffective control of documents or records. We get to an organization, we are presented with obsolete documents, or we are presented, or documents cannot be found, especially records. Okay, so that one is one of the most common gaps that we encounter. And also supplier control issues. Can have some suppliers that are not being monitored, and also the re-evaluations may not be taking place, okay? Then lastly, for preparation of stage 2, this one can also apply in as a preparation for surveillance. So, but if it's stage 2, obviously you need to address the gaps that have been identified during stage 1, and you also need to implement the procedures fully. You just need to ensure that the procedures that you have documented are things that you are already implementing. We find that in most cases people document beautiful procedures, but it's not what they are doing in their organization. So you just need to ensure that what you have written, what you have documented, is what exactly is what you are doing in that organization, okay? And then, of course, internal audits need to be conducted, and management review needs to be conducted, and the procedures need to document precisely how often, or the frequency of conducting particularly the management reviews, okay? And then training on the employees, the trainings and retrainings, okay, for competency. That also needs to be done, and also to organize implementation, organize documents and records, so that you know, just to have a system to be able to access all the documentation and the records, because we find that sometimes when the auditors come to an organization, the documents are not found. They are nowhere to be found. And then later on, after some time, after a week, they send an email and say, "Oh, we found that document." So that would be a gap that we usually come across. And of course, we want to verify regulatory compliance, just to ensure that if there is any reporting that is required, any updating of the SAHPRA license that needs to be done, we just need to ensure that all that is done. Okay, I think with that, I want to thank you all. I'll hand you over to Shiroma.
Thank you, Scelo. Thank you.